Hey, welcome back. Have you ever wondered if some of the techniques and technologies used in F-class are appropriate for PRS? I have, because I have all those techniques and technologies mastered. So let's take a look at bullet pointing specifically today on the 105 grain Berger hybrid bullet. The test is really quite simple in essence. I've been using this test to figure out what my pointing was worth in F-class for quite some time, and I've shared it with the patrons in the past. The 105 grain hybrid bullet is a unique projectile in that it has a very small meplat. So the amount of BC increase is going to be very limited, and that might make this not worth doing. So first, let's go test and see what the BC change is, and then we'll go calculate that against what I know from shooting a few matches in PRS to see if it's going to actually make any difference in the real world. So I took 40 rounds to the range, 20 with pointed bullets and 20 with unpointed bullets, all out of the same box, so it would be a nice fair test, same exact load, and we shot them round robin. Unpointed, pointed, unpointed, pointed, to get the data that we need from the lab radar at the muzzle and from the shot marker downrange. Now, before you jump up and down and type in the comments about shot markers being inaccurate for velocity, I understand how spastic that system is, along with all of the acoustic targets. But it is a data point. We're also going to look at something else here because I think it's quite interesting. There is a slight difference in the vertical point of impact at 600 yards. But that is so noisy because the mirage was so bad that I can't really say that there's anything valuable there. So I'm not going to depend on the vertical point of impact. Instead, I'm going to depend on the velocity change. But we're going to use a quick statistical technique to eliminate some of that goofy data that might be there by removing the outliers. So from my 20 shots each, I only got 19 lab radar readings on the pointed bullets and 20 on the unpointed. So you'll have to forgive me. There's a little less data in one than the other, but it still works. In order to remove outliers, I sorted them by velocity loss over the 600-yard range, and then eliminated the top 3 and bottom 3 from each group. I also did several variations of that to see what it did to the average muzzle velocity and impact velocity and average loss over that distance, but it really didn't have a huge effect in the outcome. So we take all of that data and we feed it back into JBM ballistics, and we come up with a set of G7 BCs, calculated based on the environmental data collected by my Kestrel. And we get a big surprise at the very beginning, and that is that the calculated BC is lower than what you would expect based on the numbers on the box. Does that mean that the numbers on the box are wrong? Absolutely not. I've done this test for years with 180 grain hybrids, and they have never read what the box said. At the same time, at 1,000 yards, they've always performed to the box numbers. So you'll have to take that number with a grain of salt. What we're looking for is a delta, a difference between the two. And we found one. The difference was 2.6% in BC. So if we take the original 0.275 number, that means that our final BC with a pointed bullet, pointed pretty aggressively, would be 282. Is that worth doing? Well, there's a couple things to consider here. The first is the standard deviation in the velocity loss, because this can make a difference at longer ranges. In this case, the velocity loss standard deviation for unpointed bullets was only 10 feet a second. For the pointed bullets, it was 20. And even when I removed outliers, it was still almost double of what the unpointed bullets were. So pointing these bullets increased the standard deviation, the variation in the BC from bullet to bullet. That's something to consider when you start pointing bullets. Are you making them better or making them worse? It's easy to do either one. 2.6% is not a lot inside of 1,000 yards. Let me give you an example. At 600 yards, the difference in wind drift for a 10-mile-an-hour direct crosswind is 0.6 of an inch for this difference in BC. That's virtually nothing. Now, in F-class, it might get you that 10 or that X one time. But in PRS, it turns an edge hit into an edge hit. It really doesn't do a lot for you. Ultimately, you could get to a situation where you just clip the edge of a plate and they see it versus not, but that's pretty thin, guys. I'm just saying it's pretty thin. At 1,000 yards, the difference in wind drift and a 10-mile-an-hour direct crosswind is only a touch over 4 inches. Now, that is something that can put you on or off the plate if you were to miscall the wind by 10 miles an hour. In reality, the likelihood is you will miscall the wind by no more than 2 miles an hour. So that's just over 3/4 of an inch. Now, 3/4 of an inch can get you on and off the plate by just a little bit, an edge hit versus a clean miss. But how often do you actually shoot beyond 1,000 yards or even out that far in PRS? Well, that's where a little research comes in. I've been to 4 separate PRS matches already, and one of them was on a range that was limited to 650 yards due to the amount of land available. So we're going to exclude that one. The remaining 3 matches, 2 were at Rock Lake and 1 was at the Lead Farm. Out of those 3 matches, there was a total of 394 points available. Now, of those 394 points available, 28.6% of them were beyond 700 yards, but only 4.2% were beyond 1,000 yards. In other words, the likelihood of a 1,000-yard shot is pretty darn low, and you might have some bigger fish to fry before you worry about the wind drift at 1,000 yards, because the number of shots taken has to be huge before you're going to see an actual difference in that wind drift. At the same time, variations in the BC are going to create more noise in that than is necessary and will likely defeat the whole purpose of increasing the BC. Should the BC have increased 2.6%, or do you think it should have been more? I was pretty aggressive with them when I pointed them. Leave a comment below and let me know what you're seeing if you're pointing the 105 hybrid. And also whether you've been testing to see if your pointing is making the BC more or less consistent. Until next time, shoot straight. Careful with those bullets. You might mess them up. And I'll see you in the next video.